My children had no idea they were dividing up the belongings of the woman who had just become the sole heir to a $47 million real estate empire spanning 3 states, whose modest apartment concealed legal documents that would make her one of the wealthiest widows in Connecticut, and whose worthless old furniture they were donating to Goodwill actually included antique collections worth more than their combined annual salaries, while the elderly mother they considered a financial burden was about to discover that her estranged billionaire uncle's will would transform her from their charity case into the woman who could either secure their children's college funds or watch them struggle with student loans while she funded scholarships for strangers who understood the value of respecting elderly relatives and maintaining family relationships. Before we dive into Fautada der Sie Imperativ, this incredible Kliwitschori of family greed meeting karmic justice, and the real estate fortune my ungrateful children never knew was coming, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me about your worst experience with family members who treated you like a burden while expecting inheritance benefits, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one about what happens when adult children assume elderly parents have nothing left to offer, only to discover just how catastrophically wrong they can be when family loyalty meets generational wealth that could change their lives forever, or disappear entirely based on how they chose to treat the woman whose unexpected inheritance would make national news and whose revenge would become a cautionary tale about respecting elderly relatives whose true worth isn't always visible until it's too late to matter. My name is Margaret Whitmore, I'm 72 years old, and this story begins on September 15, 2023, when I made what seemed like a reasonable decision to downsize from my longtime family home in Greenwich, Connecticut, to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in nearby Stamford, a decision that would reveal my 3 adult children's true character and teach them the most expensive lesson about taking elderly mothers for granted whose quiet dignity concealed an incoming fortune that could either continue supporting their comfortable middle-class lifestyles or disappear entirely, based on how they chose to treat the woman whose unexpected inheritance would transform her from their perceived burden into one of the wealthiest widows in Fairfield County, within 6 weeks of their cruelest betrayal. But to Upatachira. Understand how my children, Patricia, a 47-year-old marketing director earning $85,000 annually at a Hartford insurance company, Michael, a 44-year-old family physician building his practice in New Haven, and David, a 41-year-old high school mathematics teacher following his father's footsteps in education, ended up facing financial uncertainty and family exile within 2 months of abandoning me during my most vulnerable transition. You need to know who I was before. My carefully maintained image as a struggling retiree on a fixed income concealed the incoming real estate empire and investment portfolio that would elevate me from Social Security dependence to multimillionaire status faster than they could process their fundamental miscalculation about elderly mothers and hidden family wealth. For 38 years, I was Margaret Whitmore, dedicated elementary school teacher at Riverside Elementary in Greenwich, Connecticut, and devoted wife to Robert Whitmore, who served as principal at Greenwich High School for over 2 decades. Our combined educators' salaries and careful budgeting had supported our family through what appeared to be a typical middle-class suburban lifestyle, raising 3 children who assumed their comfortable childhood, private music lessons, summer camps, quality clothing, and reliable family vacations to Cape Cod had been funded through typical educational professionals' income and standard teacher benefits packages, rather than understanding that their opportunities had actually been created through my secret relationship with my father's estranged brother, Uncle Theodore Whitmore, whose real estate investments and property development empire I had been quietly managing since 1985, and whose will would soon transfer complete control of his $47 million fortune to the niece, who had maintained loyalty and correspondence when the rest of the family had written him off as an eccentric recluse with antisocial tendencies and questionable business practices. Uncle Theodore wasn't just some distant relative with modest savings. He was a brilliant, methodical real estate developer who had transformed a $200,000 inheritance from our grandfather in 1962 into a sophisticated property empire that included 12 apartment complexes throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts, 8 commercial buildings in prime downtown locations, 14 single-family rental properties in desirable suburban neighborhoods, and 6 undeveloped parcels in areas targeted for future municipal expansion and commercial development. His portfolio generated over $3.2 million annually in rental income, property management fees, and strategic development profits that required constant coordination with property managers, municipal planning departments, contractors, architects, and tenant relations specialists who managed the day-to-day operations of his extensive real estate holdings. But Theodore's success hadn't come from luck or inheritance alone. It had been built through decades of painstaking market research, conservative investment strategies, and systematic relationship building with construction professionals, municipal officials, and community organizations who understood that responsible property development served both investor interests and community housing needs. While other developers focused on quick profits and speculative construction, Theodore specialized in long-term property investment and tenant-focused management that created stable housing for hundreds of families while generating steady returns that could weather economic downturns and market fluctuations that destroyed less carefully planned real estate ventures. I wasn't just Theodore's occasional correspondent or distant family member. I was his trusted financial advisor, property management coordinator, and family liaison who had been working closely with him for nearly 4 decades to build and maintain his real estate empire while keeping our collaboration completely private from my husband, children, and extended family, who would never have understood the complexity and scope of our business relationship or appreciated the strategic planning that had created opportunities for family members who demonstrated loyalty. My responsibilities encompassed reviewing monthly financial reports from property managers who supervised Theodore's residential and commercial holdings, analyzing market data and demographic trends that guided our investment decisions, coordinating with architects and contractors who handled property improvements and tenant modifications, negotiating with municipal planning departments who regulated development approvals and zoning requirements, and implementing the strategic planning that had turned modest initial investments into a real estate empire worth tens of millions of dollars across multiple states. And during my teaching career at Riverside Elementary, I had carefully compartmentalized my professional education responsibilities and my private real estate management duties, handling Theodore's business coordination during evenings, weekends, and summer breaks, when my teaching schedule allowed focused attention on property development projects and investment planning. My colleagues and family assumed my evening phone calls and weekend paperwork represented typical teacher responsibilities, grading papers, lesson planning, parent communication, rather than understanding that I was actually coordinating million-dollar property transactions and development projects that required constant communication with real estate professionals throughout New England. The complexity of managing Theodore's empire, while maintaining my teaching career and family responsibilities, had required extraordinary organizational skills and time management that most people couldn't comprehend or appreciate. Property management emergencies didn't respect school schedules or family dinners, and municipal planning meetings often conflicted with parent-teacher conferences and school board obligations. I had learned to balance tenant crises with classroom management, coordinate construction projects during school holidays, and handle investment decisions between teaching responsibilities and family commitments that required constant prioritization and strategic planning. My teaching salary at Riverside Elementary had provided our families apparent primary income and social identity within Greenwich's educational community, but the real financial foundation for a comfortable lifestyle had been quietly supplemented through my property management compensation and strategic investment returns that Theodore shared with me as his trusted business partner and family representative. The modest teacher benefits and pension planning that my children observed were actually secondary income sources compared to the real estate profits and property appreciation that had been funding their educational opportunities and lifestyle advantages for decades. The summer cottage in Cape Cod, where our family had vacationed every July for 15 years, wasn't rented through my teacher's salary as my children assumed. It was actually one of Theodore's investment properties that he allowed us to use while generating rental income from other vacationers during peak season months. The reliable family station wagon that we replaced every 4 years wasn't purchased through careful budgeting of education salaries. It was funded through property management bonuses and investment returns that Theodore provided as compensation for my business coordination, and strategic planning contributions to his real estate success. My children's private music lessons, summer camps, and educational enrichment activities that had distinguished their suburban childhood from typical teacher families hadn't been funded through standard educational benefits or careful middle-class budgeting as they assumed. Patricia's piano lessons with a Juilliard-trained instructor, Michael's attendance at prestigious science camps at Yale University, and David's participation in advanced mathematics competitions throughout New England had been made possible through my real estate management income and Theodore's investment success that provided educational opportunities typically available only to wealthy families with business or professional backgrounds far exceeding typical educator resources. Even our family home in Greenwich, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street that had appreciated significantly over our 30-year residency, had been purchased with assistance from Theodore's real estate expertise and financial coordination rather than solely through Robert's principal salary and my teaching income. Theodore had provided market analysis, negotiation strategy, and down payment assistance that had allowed us to purchase property in one of Connecticut's most desirable school districts while maintaining the appearance of typical educator success rather than revealing our connection to his property development network and investment resources. But perhaps the most significant aspect of my secret relationship with Theodore was my role as his strategic advisor and market research coordinator for property development decisions that required deep understanding of community needs, educational demographics, and family housing trends that I had gained through my teaching career and Greenwich community involvement. My daily interaction with families, knowledge of neighborhood development patterns, and understanding of educational facility planning had provided Theodore with invaluable insight for property investment decisions and development timing that had generated millions in property appreciation and rental income over nearly 4 decades of collaboration. The apartment complexes that Theodore had developed in Hartford, New Haven, and Springfield weren't just investment properties. They were carefully planned housing communities that served working families, young professionals, and elderly residents who needed quality rental housing near employment centers and educational facilities. My recommendations about family housing needs, community transportation requirements, and educational facility access had guided Theodore's site selection and apartment design decisions that created housing solutions while generating excellent investment returns for patient, community-focused development strategies. The commercial buildings that Theodore owned in downtown Hartford, New Britain, and Waterbury weren't just rental properties. They were strategically located business facilities that supported local entrepreneurs, small businesses, and professional services that created employment and economic development in communities that needed investment and revitalization. My understanding of community economic needs and business development trends had helped Theodore identify locations and tenant requirements that served local business growth while providing stable rental income and property appreciation for long-term investment success. The undeveloped parcels that Theodore had acquired throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts represented strategic land banking and future development planning that required sophisticated understanding of municipal growth patterns, transportation development, and demographic trends that would determine property values and development opportunities over decades of patient investment and strategic planning. My research and community involvement had provided Theodore with insights about school district planning, infrastructure development, and residential growth patterns that had guided his land acquisition and development timing decisions. During the 1990s economic expansion that had created unprecedented growth in Connecticut's suburban communities, Theodore and I had coordinated property acquisitions and development projects that had positioned our portfolio for maximum benefit from residential and commercial growth, while maintaining conservative investment practices that protected our holdings from speculative bubbles and market volatility. While other developers had pursued aggressive expansion and leveraged financing that would later prove catastrophic, we had focused on sustainable growth and debt-free property ownership that could weather economic downturns and provide steady income regardless of market conditions. The 2008 financial crisis that had devastated real estate markets throughout New England and destroyed countless property development companies had actually strengthened Theodore's portfolio through strategic acquisitions of distressed properties and careful tenant support programs that had maintained occupancy rates and rental income while competitors struggled with foreclosures and bankruptcy. My coordination with tenant assistance programs and municipal housing authorities had allowed us to provide emergency rent relief and payment planning that had kept families housed while preserving our rental income and property values during the most challenging economic period in decades. By 2015, Theodore's property portfolio had grown to include holdings worth over $40 million, with minimal debt and maximum flexibility for continued expansion and development opportunities that would benefit from economic recovery and demographic growth throughout southern New England. Our conservative investment strategies and community-focused development approach had created a real estate empire that generated substantial income while serving hundreds of families and supporting local economic development in communities that needed quality housing and business facilities. But throughout all these years of property development success and real estate wealth accumulation, I had maintained complete secrecy about my relationship with Theodore and our business collaboration. My husband Robert had known about my distant uncle and occasional family correspondence, but he had never understood the scope of our business relationship or the extent to which Theodore's real estate success had been supplementing our family's income and creating opportunities for our children's educational and lifestyle advantages. I had preserved our marriage and family relationships by compartmentalizing my real estate responsibilities and maintaining the appearance of typical educator success rather than revealing wealth and business connections that might have created complicated family dynamics and unrealistic expectations. My children had grown up completely unaware that their comfortable suburban lifestyle, educational opportunities, and family advantages had been quietly supported through real estate wealth and property development success that most educator families could never access or achieve. Patricia, Michael, and David had internalized their opportunities as natural consequences of hard-working parents and good family values, rather than understanding that their advantages had been created through strategic wealth management and business success that required appreciation and respect for the elderly relatives whose life work had created opportunities for younger generations. The careful secrecy that had protected our family relationships and maintained Theodore's privacy had also created a dangerous situation where my children had never learned to appreciate elderly relatives or understand the importance of family loyalty and respect for older generations whose experiences and relationships might conceal resources and opportunities that could change family fortunes forever. They had assumed that their comfortable lives were permanent and their future inheritance would be modest teacher retirement benefits, rather than understanding that family wealth often required family relationships and respect for elderly relatives whose true worth might not become apparent until inheritance distribution revealed the consequences of their careless treatment and family priorities. Now, as I prepared to transition from my longtime family home to a more manageable apartment, I was also preparing to receive news that would transform my life and reveal my children's true character in ways that would determine their access to generational wealth and family legacy that could either secure their children's futures or disappear based on their treatment of the elderly mother, whose incoming inheritance would make her one of Connecticut's wealthiest widows and most influential property owners almost overnight. The legal documents that would arrive from Theodore's estate attorneys within 6 weeks of my apartment transition would transfer complete ownership and control of his $47 million real estate empire to the niece who had maintained loyalty and business partnership when other family members had dismissed him, was antisocial and eccentric. The inheritance would include not just property and financial assets but also responsibility for hundreds of tenants, dozens of employees, and community development projects that required wisdom, compassion, and respect for the multi-generational planning that had created opportunities for family members who understood the value of elderly relationship, maintenance, and traditional family values. But my children approached my apartment downsizing with assumptions about elderly decline and financial limitation that would prove to be the most expensive miscalculation of their lives about the true nature of family wealth, inheritance planning, and the critical importance of maintaining respectful relationships with elderly relatives whose life experiences and strategic relationships often concealed resources and opportunities that could change family destiny forever, or disappear entirely, based on demonstrated loyalty and appreciation during vulnerable transition periods when elderly family members needed support rather than judgment and abandonment from the very people whose futures depended on understanding that family wealth requires family values and respect for the generations whose sacrifices and achievements had created the foundation for opportunities that most families could never imagine or achieve. I wasn't just living as a retired teacher in a modest Connecticut apartment. I was the secret financial advisor and family representative for one of New England's most successful private real estate developers, whose property holdings included commercial buildings in Hartford, residential developments throughout Fairfield County, and investment properties in Massachusetts and Rhode Island that generated over $3.2 million annually in rental income, management fees, and development profits that I had been coordinating through discrete financial planning and investment management that my own family had never suspected or investigated. My responsibilities encompassed reviewing architectural plans and development proposals for Uncle Theodore's construction projects, coordinating with property managers and tenant relations specialists who supervised his residential and commercial holdings, negotiating with contractors and municipal planning departments who managed his development approvals, and implementing the investment strategies that had turned his initial inheritance from our grandfather into a real estate empire worth tens of millions of dollars across 3 states and dozens of properties that required sophisticated management and strategic oversight. But these achievements only tell part of the story about the complexity and critical importance of private wealth management and family relationship dynamics at the highest levels of real estate development and investment coordination. When you're responsible for managing property portfolios that affect hundreds of tenants, coordinating development projects that impact entire communities, and maintaining family relationships that determine generational wealth transfer, every decision carries enormous weight and consequences that extend far beyond individual financial success to impact family legacy and multi-generational prosperity that most people never understand or appreciate. During my early years managing Uncle Theodore's affairs, starting in 1985, I began as his correspondence coordinator and family liaison, handling communications and relationship maintenance, while my husband Robert focused on his education career and our children pursued typical suburban activities. While other family members dismissed Uncle Theodore as difficult and antisocial, I understood that successful real estate development required patience, strategic thinking, and respect for elderly relatives whose business acumen and property investments could create opportunities for family members who demonstrated loyalty and competence, rather than entitlement and expectation. That first real estate project taught me essential lessons about property development, municipal relations, and the importance of treating business partnerships as long-term relationships that served community development rather than simply generating profits for investors. I learned to evaluate property potential carefully, maintain projects to the highest construction standards, and build relationships with contractors, architects, and municipal officials that would become the foundation for decades of successful real estate development and community improvement projects throughout Connecticut and neighboring states. By 1995, Uncle Theodore's property portfolio had grown to include 18 different real estate holdings throughout New England, including apartment complexes, commercial buildings, and development properties that were carefully selected and managed conservatively, allowing us to weather the late 1990s real estate fluctuations that destroyed many speculative development companies, while actually expanding our property holdings by partnering with distressed sellers and municipal development programs that had lost commercial backing but possessed excellent location potential. The 2000s proved to be a decisive decade for establishing the Whitmore family real estate legacy as a major force in New England property development. While larger companies focused on speculative construction and maximum profit extraction, Uncle Theodore specialized in long-term property investment and community-focused development that served local housing needs and commercial requirements while generating steady rental income and property appreciation. This approach allowed us to build deep relationships with municipal planning departments, community organizations, and local business networks that provided early access to development opportunities and protected our investments from market volatility and economic downturns. One of our most significant early successes involved acquiring and renovating a historic downtown building in Hartford that had been abandoned by previous developers who considered the restoration requirements too expensive for profitable development. The project required coordinating with historic preservation societies, obtaining complex municipal approvals, and managing restoration work that took 4 years and cost $2.8 million. But the result was a mixed-use building that transformed a deteriorating downtown block, while generating exceptional rental income and property appreciation that funded dozens of subsequent development projects throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. The historic renovation became a model for community-focused development throughout the real estate industry, demonstrating that preservation-minded construction and neighborhood improvement could work together to create beautiful buildings while generating excellent returns for investors who understood that property development required patience, community engagement, and commitment to serving local housing and commercial needs rather than maximizing short-term profits through cheapest possible construction and tenant extraction strategies. A point probably upteat in tease. During the 2008 financial crisis that devastated real estate markets and eliminated billions of dollars in property development funding, forcing countless development companies into bankruptcy and destroying career prospects for property managers and real estate professionals throughout New England, Uncle Theodore and I coordinated protective strategies that literally saved dozens of our tenants and property relationships, while actually expanding our holdings by acquiring distressed properties from failed development companies at fraction of value prices. Working 16-hour days for 8 months straight, we restructured rental agreements in real time, negotiated with banks and municipal agencies to prevent foreclosure of promising properties, managed emergency tenant assistance programs that kept families housed during the economic crisis, and implemented investment strategies that allowed struggling property owners to maintain dignity while transferring valuable real estate assets to our management network. The most devastating aspect of my children's upcoming betrayal was that none of them understood that their comfortable professional lives, their children's educational opportunities, and their assumption of eventual inheritance had been quietly supported through Uncle Theodore's real estate fortune and property management success for over 15 years. The down payment assistance that allowed my daughter Patricia to purchase her home in Westport, the private school tuitions for my grandchildren, the emergency financial support during my son Michael's medical practice startup, all of this had been funded through property management profits and real estate appreciation that I had deliberately kept private to avoid creating family dependency or professional jealousy that could damage both our business relationships and family harmony. But my children had no idea that the mother they were about to abandon during her apartment transition controlled access to real estate wealth and property management networks that had been quietly supporting their comfortable lifestyles. The elementary school teacher whose downsizing they would treat as pathetic accommodation was actually documenting their assumptions and family priorities that would ultimately determine whether they continued enjoying access to my incoming inheritance or learned what their lives would look like without the real estate fortune that was about to transform their struggling mother into one of Connecticut's wealthiest widows and most influential property owners. The apartment transition that my children would treat as elderly decline and financial necessity was actually strategic preparation for inheritance management and property portfolio expansion that would require sophisticated coordination and family relationship management. The modest 2-bedroom apartment in Stamford wasn't evidence of financial limitation. It was practical headquarters for someone about to inherit dozens of properties and coordinate real estate management operations that generated millions in annual revenue while supporting hundreds of tenants and dozens of employees throughout 3 states. The legal documents that would soon arrive from Uncle Theodore's estate attorneys weren't just inheritance papers. They were transfer documents for property holdings worth $47 million, including apartment complexes that housed over 400 families, commercial buildings that supported hundreds of local businesses, and development properties that would create thousands of construction jobs and housing opportunities throughout New England over the following decade. The inheritance would include not just wealth but responsibility for community development and family legacy management that required wisdom, dedication, and respect for the multi-generational planning that had created opportunities for family members who understood the value of loyalty and elderly relationship maintenance. My children's upcoming betrayal would reveal their fundamental assumption that elderly mothers represented financial burdens, rather than understanding that my modest lifestyle and careful spending had been strategic wealth preservation and community investment planning that created the foundation for generational prosperity and family security that required appreciation and respect rather than dismissal and abandonment. When elderly relatives needed family support during major life transitions and estate management preparation, the apartment downsizing that my children would treat as evidence of decline was actually preparation for wealth management responsibilities that would transform not only my personal financial situation, but also my ability to impact community development, support local businesses, and create educational opportunities for grandchildren who demonstrated appropriate respect. For elderly relatives and traditional family values that distinguished responsible wealth management from entitled inheritance expectation and elderly exploitation. But my children approached my apartment. Transition with assumptions about elderly decline and financial limitation that would soon prove to be the most expensive miscalculation of their lives about the true nature of family wealth, inheritance planning, and the importance of maintaining relationships with elderly relatives whose life experiences and strategic relationships might conceal resources and opportunities that could change family fortunes forever, or disappear entirely based on demonstrated respect and loyalty during vulnerable Looking back now with the clarity that comes from watching adult children reveal their true character through their treatment of elderly mothers they consider financially irrelevant and socially burdensome, I can see that my family's assumptions about my limited resources and dependence on their occasional assistance weren't sudden judgments formed during our apartment downsizing conversations. They were carefully calculated assessments based on their belief that retired teachers represented emotional obligations that successful middle-class professionals could manage through periodic check-ins and holiday visits without understanding the real estate empire and property management network that had been quietly funding their tie-ins. Comfortable lifestyles and creating opportunities for over 2 decades of strategic family support and educational advancement. What my children didn't know, and what they would discover in the most expensive way possible within 8 weeks of abandoning me during my apartment transition, was that the modest 2-bedroom apartment in Stamford, where I would be preparing simple meals and organizing decades of family photographs, was actually the operational headquarters of one of Connecticut's most successful private real estate development companies, whose property holdings and rental management had generated breakthrough community development projects that housed thousands of families, while creating the financial foundation that had elevated every member of our family to professional success they believed they had earned through individual merit and personal achievement, rather than understanding the systematic support and opportunity creation that had distinguished their lives from typical educator families. The comfortable living room where my family would gather for their final perfunctory visits, furnished with traditional pieces that reflected my preference for understated elegance rather than ostentatious wealth display, contained the same strategic planning capabilities that had coordinated property development programs worth tens of millions of dollars across multiple municipalities and housing markets throughout New England. The family photos and graduation pictures that covered my walls weren't just proud mother displays. They were visual documentation of educational achievements that had been systematically supported through real estate profits and property management networks that most family members had never questioned or investigated, assuming their success was natural consequence of hard work rather than strategic advantage and financial support. The kitchen where I would prepare modest dinners for ungrateful children was equipped with secure communication systems that allowed me to coordinate with property managers, municipal planning officials, and construction contractors who managed tenant relations and development projects that determined housing availability for hundreds of families throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. The dining room table where my family would soon reveal their true character had hosted strategic planning sessions with real estate attorneys, architectural consultants, and municipal development coordinators who controlled zoning approvals and construction permits that generated both community improvement and substantial rental income over decades of patient investment and careful market analysis. My home office, which appeared to be a simple retirement workspace with basic computer equipment and traditional furniture, actually contained sophisticated information systems and communication networks that managed a property portfolio generating over $3.2 million annually in rental income, development profits, and property management fees. The filing systems that looked like typical elderly paperwork organization actually housed documentation for municipal approvals, construction contracts, and tenant agreements that represented 4 decades of systematic property development and strategic relationship building in the most regulated and community-sensitive industry in American real estate development. But beyond the physical infrastructure that supported my property management operations, what my family completely failed to understand was that my daily routine represented the same level of strategic expertise and industry influence that had earned Theodore's real estate empire recognition as one of New England's most successful private property development companies, featured in municipal planning journals, and consulted by state housing authorities seeking guidance on affordable housing development and community revitalization strategies that affected housing outcomes for thousands of families throughout Connecticut. My morning schedule that my family observed during their infrequent apartment visits included reviewing monthly financial reports from 18 different property managers who supervised Theodore's residential and commercial holdings, analyzing market data from real estate databases that cost $45,000 annually to access, and coordinating with principal contractors who supervised maintenance programs at apartment complexes in Hartford, New Haven, Springfield, and Worcester that housed over 400 families and provided quality rental housing for working professionals, elderly residents, and young families who needed The phone conversations that my family heard me conducting during their brief visits weren't just social calls with elderly friends. They were strategic consultations with municipal planning directors who specialized in zoning regulations and development approvals, real estate attorneys who analyzed property acquisition opportunities and regulatory compliance requirements, and property management coordinators who supervised tenant relations and maintenance programs that required coordination between municipal housing authorities, contractor networks, and community organizations that ensured quality housing. And the typical retirement activities that my family witnessed during their visits were actually advanced property management techniques that I demonstrated through the Whitmore Property Development Institute, our exclusive consultation program that prepared real estate professionals and municipal planners for leadership positions in community development companies, affordable housing organizations, and municipal planning departments that required sophisticated understanding of zoning regulations, tenant relations, and sustainable development strategies that determined which housing projects received approval and which promising communities successfully attracted. The Whitmore Institute was perhaps the most respected property development consultation program in southern New England, accepting only 8 participants annually through an application process more competitive than graduate business programs, and requiring extensive experience in real estate development, municipal planning, or community housing administration before candidates qualified for consideration. Our program alumni included chief development officers at major property management companies, municipal planning directors, affordable housing coordinators at prestigious nonprofit organizations, and real estate executives who managed community development programs worth hundreds of millions of dollars and affected housing outcomes for thousands of families throughout New England and the Mid-Atlantic states. Participants paid $85,000 for our intensive 6-month program, which included hands-on training in property development, internships at our management facilities, and personal mentorship from me and our network of real estate professionals who managed property development companies, municipal planning departments, and community housing organizations that developed quality housing for working families, elderly residents, and young professionals who needed affordable rental options near employment centers and educational facilities that supported career development and family stability. The waiting list for admission to the Whitmore Institute extended over 2 years, and we regularly declined applications from real estate executives at Fortune 500 development companies who didn't meet our standards for community focus, tenant advocacy, and commitment to sustainable development that distinguished our approach from profit-driven property speculation, that prioritized maximum rental extraction over housing quality and community improvement, that should guide responsible real estate development and neighborhood revitalization efforts. What made our program unique wasn't just the training quality, it was the industry connections and career advancement opportunities that came with graduation from the most respected property development education program in New England real estate markets. Whitmore Institute graduates had automatic access to executive positions at property management companies that never advertised openings, received personal recommendations from municipal planning directors and housing authority administrators, and could leverage our network of alumni and professional partners to build careers that would be impossible to achieve through traditional real estate education and industry networking that didn't provide access to the highest levels of community development funding and municipal planning decision-making. My children's comfortable middle-class careers, which they considered the result of personal achievement and professional competence, were actually dependent on relationships with educational institutions and professional networks that existed because of exclusive partnerships and strategic connections that I controlled through property development success and community involvement that had taken decades to establish through consistent excellence in housing development and municipal relationship building that served community needs while generating the financial returns necessary for continued property investment and family support. Patricia's marketing position at Hartford Insurance, where she earned $85,000 annually as senior marketing director and received annual bonuses that had allowed her to purchase a beautiful home in Westport and send her 2 children to elite private schools, was actually connected to our property development network through professional relationships that I had cultivated with insurance industry executives who provided coverage for our residential and commercial properties. The company's recognition of Patricia's marketing competence and her rapid advancement to director level reflected not only her professional skills but also the institutional trust and business relationships that my property management success provided to companies seeking strategic partnerships and development expertise. The professional network that had advanced Patricia's insurance career included executives and business development coordinators who understood that our family represented access to property development expertise and construction project coordination that could provide competitive advantages in commercial insurance markets that required sophisticated understanding of real estate risks and development project management. Patricia's marketing success and industry recognition were enhanced by her family's reputation within Connecticut's business community as representatives of successful, community-focused property development that maintained excellent safety records and tenant satisfaction rates. Michael's family medicine practice in New Haven, which had grown from a modest clinic to a thriving multi-physician group generating over $400,000 annually in combined professional income, had been supported through strategic relationships with healthcare facility development and medical building management that I had coordinated through our commercial property portfolio. The medical office building where Michael's practice was located had been developed through our strategic planning and community health facility coordination, providing him with below-market rental rates and practice development support that had accelerated his transition from residency to independent practice ownership. The medical facility partnerships that had established Michael's practice success were funded through our healthcare-focused property development programs that provided medical professionals with quality office space and practice development support, while generating rental income and community health facility improvement that served both investment objectives and public health needs throughout New Haven County. Michael's patient base and professional recognition were enhanced by his practice's location in a medical facility that attracted quality healthcare providers and served diverse community health needs, NESEDs. David's teaching position at Fairfield High School, where he earned $78,000 annually as mathematics department head and coached the academic decathlon team that had won 3 consecutive state championships, had been supported through educational facility development and school district relationship building that I had coordinated through our municipal partnership programs. The scholarship fund that David administered for mathematically gifted students had been established through our educational foundation grants that provided academic enrichment and college preparation support for students throughout Fairfield County's public school systems. The academic recognition that had advanced David's teaching career included awards and professional development opportunities that were connected to our educational community involvement and school facility improvement programs that demonstrated our family's commitment to public education excellence and student achievement support. David's leadership role in mathematics education and his selection for prestigious teaching assignments reflected both his educational competence and the institutional relationships that my community development success had provided to school districts that valued partnership with local business leaders and property development professionals. But beyond the direct career benefits that my real estate success had provided to individual family members, what made their upcoming abandonment particularly devastating was their complete failure to understand the systematic nature of their dependence on my property management network for continued professional advancement and financial security. They had never questioned why their career trajectories had been consistently smooth, why professional opportunities had always materialized at the right time, why financial emergencies had always been resolved quickly, or why their community recognition had developed so remarkably compared to colleagues with similar qualifications and experience levels who lacked family connections to successful property development and municipal relationship networks. The real estate ecosystem that I had created through Theodore's empire and strategic planning extended far beyond our immediate family to encompass hundreds of tenants, dozens of contractors and property management professionals, and multiple municipal relationships throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. Our property development programs had created employment opportunities for construction workers, maintenance specialists, administrative coordinators, and tenant relations professionals who understood that their career success was connected to the continued strength and growth of our development network and community improvement programs that required sustained investment and strategic leadership to maintain excellence in housing quality and neighborhood development. Our partnerships with municipal planning departments in Hartford, New Haven, Springfield, Worcester, and 12 smaller municipalities had generated housing development projects and community improvement initiatives that enhanced the quality of life and economic development in communities that needed investment and revitalization while providing educational opportunities and professional experience for municipal planners, community development specialists, and housing authority administrators who gained credentials and professional recognition that would benefit their careers throughout their professional lives in government service, and the affordable housing programs that had established my reputation within Connecticut's community development networks had created a network of housing advocates, social service coordinators, and community organizers who understood that their ability to provide quality housing for low-income families and elderly residents depended on continued partnership with property developers who prioritized community service and tenant advocacy over maximum profit extraction from vulnerable populations who needed stable housing and supportive community environments. My commercial property initiatives, conducted through partnerships with small business development organizations, minority business associations, and local chambers of commerce, had funded the establishment of business incubators and professional service centers that provided affordable office space and business development support for entrepreneurs, professional service providers, and community-based businesses that created employment and economic development in neighborhoods that needed investment and commercial activity to support family-friendly community development. The community development programs that I had funded through downtown revitalization projects in Hartford, New Britain, and Waterbury had produced neighborhood improvement initiatives and small business support programs that reduced commercial vacancy rates while improving community safety and economic opportunity for residents who had been underserved by traditional commercial development that prioritized suburban mall construction over urban community investment and neighborhood business development. But the most significant aspect of my property development empire's influence was its role in determining which housing development projects received municipal approval and community support, which neighborhoods gained access to quality housing and commercial development, and which families received opportunities for stable housing and community involvement that distinguished successful community development from routine property speculation that lacked commitment to long-term neighborhood improvement and tenant advocacy. My relationships with municipal planning officials and housing authority administrators provided property developers and community organizations with strategic guidance about development approval processes and community engagement requirements that could mean the difference between successful project completion and community opposition that ended promising housing development before it reached families who could benefit from quality rental housing and neighborhood improvement. The regulatory expertise that I had developed through 4 decades of property development provided municipal planners and housing advocates with competitive advantages that determined which projects received approval and which communities successfully attracted investment and business development. The tenant advocacy networks that I had established through community housing organizations and tenant rights groups provided property management companies with access to mediation services and conflict resolution expertise necessary for maintaining positive tenant relationships and community support that was required for long-term property success and neighborhood stability. These advocacy networks represented relationships with hundreds of tenant families and community leaders who understood that their ability to maintain stable housing and community involvement depended on continued partnership with property developers who prioritized tenant satisfaction and community improvement over profit maximization and tenant exploitation. The municipal relationship networks that I had developed with planning departments, housing authorities, and economic development agencies throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts had created regional coordination systems for housing development and community improvement that maintain New England's leadership in sustainable development and affordable housing innovation. These partnerships represented relationships with government officials and community development professionals who recognized property development expertise and sought access to strategic planning and project coordination that could improve housing outcomes for their communities. The construction and maintenance contractor networks that I had coordinated through our property management operations had created employment opportunities and professional development programs for skilled tradespeople, project managers, and construction specialists throughout southern New England, who gained experience with quality construction and tenant-focused property maintenance that established their expertise in residential and commercial development that required both technical competence and community sensitivity. But my family had no idea that their comfortable professional lives and community recognition were entirely dependent on my continued involvement in property development networks and the systematic relationship building that I had coordinated through real estate success and municipal partnership development. They assumed that their achievements were self-made and their career trajectories were the natural result of personal merit, rather than understanding that their remarkable professional advancement patterns reflected the kind of community involvement and strategic networking that required family appreciation and respect for elderly relatives rather than taking for granted the opportunities and professional advantages that had distinguished their careers from other middle-class professionals who lacked similar family connections and community development access. The property management expertise and municipal relationship networks that my family attempted to ignore through their dismissive treatment of my apartment transition remained protected within our consultation programs, shared only with property development professionals and municipal planners who demonstrated genuine respect for community-focused development and commitment to housing quality that served tenant needs, rather than exploiting housing markets for maximum profit extraction at the expense of community stability and neighborhood improvement that required preservation across generations of responsible property development. My modest apartment in Stamford, where my children would soon abandon me while assuming my property management responsibilities were simple retirement activities, actually served as the strategic planning center for someone whose real estate innovations had provided quality housing for thousands of families, created employment opportunities for hundreds of construction and maintenance professionals, and maintained community development standards through systematic investment in neighborhood improvement and tenant advocacy that prepared the next generation of property developers for increasingly complex municipal requirements and community engagement that required both technical expertise and commitment to housing. The apartment transition that my family would treat as evidence of elderly decline and financial necessity was actually strategic preparation for inheritance management and property portfolio expansion that would require sophisticated coordination and community relationship maintenance. The modest two-bedroom apartment wasn't evidence of financial limitation. It was practical headquarters for someone about to inherit responsibility for dozens of properties and coordinate real estate management operations that generated millions in annual revenue while supporting hundreds of tenants and dozens of employees throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. Sometimes the most important lesson you can teach ungrateful family members is that real estate wealth and property development expertise aren't family entitlements available for career advancement and professional networking, but private resources that belong to elderly individuals who have earned the right to determine how their life's work benefits future generations, based on demonstrated appreciation, family loyalty, and respect for traditional values that require personal sacrifice and emotional investment rather than efficient coordination and convenient family management. My children would soon learn that elderly mothers who appear to be modest retirees requiring assistance may actually control property development empires worth tens of millions of dollars, possess the community influence to enhance or destroy professional reputations, and maintain the real estate authority to determine whether young professionals deserve access to family wealth or should be excluded from inheritance opportunities entirely based on their treatment of elderly relatives and respect for traditional family values that distinguish successful community development from routine property speculation. The first clear indication that my family viewed my apartment downsizing as an elderly burden rather than a strategic transition came during our family meeting in August 2023, just 1 month before my move to Stamford and 6 weeks before Uncle Theodore's death, would transform me from their perceived charity case into one of Connecticut's wealthiest widows. What initially seemed like natural family coordination and supportive planning gradually revealed itself as systematic evaluation of my care requirements and financial limitations that my successful children could manage through efficient obligation fulfillment and convenient assistance programs, rather than understanding that they were discussing logistics with the secret heir to a $47 million real estate empire, whose property management expertise had been quietly supporting their comfortable lifestyles for over 2 decades. My daughter Patricia, who had built her $85,000 marketing career at Hartford Insurance on professional relationships and industry connections that she believed represented her own strategic networking and personal achievement, approached our family planning with the analytical methodology of someone managing competing priorities rather than supporting elderly family members through major life transitions and demonstrating appreciation for the real estate wealth that had created her professional advantages and financial security throughout her adult life and career development. Mom, we need to coordinate your downsizing logistics to make sure everything goes smoothly and you have the support you need during this transition, Patricia announced during our conference call, speaking with the diplomatic efficiency of someone managing elderly care requirements while attempting to minimize personal disruption and family obligation demands. It's going to be important that we handle this systematically so you don't feel overwhelmed by all the decisions and arrangements that need to be made. But Patricia's reference to support you need and concerns about me feeling overwhelmed revealed the systematic assumptions that had been developing throughout our family discussions, where successful middle-class professionals had gradually positioned themselves as caregivers and decision-makers for an elderly relative they considered cognitively declining and financially dependent, rather than understanding that they were offering assistance to the woman whose property development expertise and municipal relationships had created the foundation for their professional recognition and community standing within Connecticut's business and educational communities. We've been thinking about the practical aspects of your move, Patricia continued, while obviously reviewing notes and coordination materials that treated my apartment transition like a senior care management project, rather than recognizing that family transitions represented opportunities to demonstrate gratitude and respect for elderly relatives whose life achievements had created opportunities for younger generations' success and professional advancement. There are a lot of details to coordinate, and we want to make sure you have help with the things that might be difficult to handle on your own. Patricia's assumption that I would need help with things that might be difficult to handle revealed her fundamental misreading of my capabilities and situation. Treating apartment downsizing like elderly accommodation rather than understanding that my transition represented strategic preparation for inheritance management and property portfolio expansion that would require sophisticated coordination and community relationship maintenance that most real estate professionals could never achieve or comprehend. My son Michael, whose $400,000 family medicine practice had been established through strategic medical facility partnerships and below-market rental arrangements that he considered evidence of his exceptional business acumen and professional competence, contributed to our family planning with suggestions that revealed his belief that elderly relatives should be managed through medical evaluation and care coordination rather than respected for their life achievements, and strategic expertise that had created opportunities for younger family members. We should probably discuss Mom's health considerations and make sure she has adequate medical support during the transition, Michael suggested while reviewing his patient care protocols and medical management strategies that apparently took priority over family appreciation and elderly respect. Moving can be stressful for older adults, and we need to monitor for signs of confusion or depression that might indicate she needs additional assistance or care coordination. Michael's suggestion that we monitor for signs of confusion revealed his systematic medicalization of my apartment transition, treating normal life changes like pathological symptoms, rather than understanding that my downsizing represented strategic business planning and inheritance preparation that required family support and appreciation, rather than medical supervision and elderly care management that treated capable adults like dependent patients requiring professional intervention and family oversight. I'm thinking we should establish regular check-ins and maybe coordinate with a geriatric care manager who can provide professional assessment and support recommendations, Michael continued, while obviously consulting his medical practice protocols and patient care guidelines that treated elderly family members like clinical cases, rather than understanding that family transitions required emotional support and practical assistance rather than medical management and professional care coordination. But Michael's approach revealed his fundamental assumption that elderly relatives represented medical responsibilities rather than family relationships that required personal investment and emotional commitment from successful professionals who had benefited from elderly relatives' strategic planning and financial support throughout their educational development and career advancement that most medical professionals never received from their families. My youngest son David, whose $78,000 teaching position at Fairfield High School in mathematics department leadership had been supported through educational facility partnerships and scholarship program administration that he attributed to his exceptional teaching competence and academic leadership, approached our family planning with recommendations that revealed his belief that elderly relatives should be accommodated through simplified living arrangements rather than respected for their professional expertise and community influence that had created educational opportunities for family members. We should focus on making Mom's new apartment as simple and manageable as possible, David suggested, while reviewing his teaching schedule and academic responsibilities that apparently took priority over family transition support and elderly appreciation. Elderly people do better with routine and familiar surroundings, so we should minimize complexity and make sure everything is organized for easy maintenance and daily living. David's suggestion that we minimize complexity and organize for easy maintenance revealed his assumption that elderly relatives required simplified environments, rather than understanding that my apartment transition represented strategic headquarters establishment for sophisticated property management operations and community relationship coordination that required advanced technology and communication systems, rather than simplified living arrangements designed for cognitive decline and physical limitation. Maybe we could arrange for meal delivery services and housekeeping assistance so Mom doesn't have to worry about daily maintenance tasks. David continued while making notes about elderly care services and support coordination that treated family transitions like dependency management, rather than understanding that capable adults required family respect and emotional support rather than service provider coordination and daily living assistance. But David's focus on daily maintenance tasks and service provider coordination demonstrated his complete misunderstanding of my capabilities and situation, treating apartment downsizing like elderly incapacity, rather than recognizing that my transition represented business relocation and strategic planning that required family appreciation and practical support, rather than dependency services and care management that treated independent adults like assisted living residents requiring professional supervision. The pattern that emerged during our family planning conversations revealed that my children had internalized assumptions about elderly decline and financial dependency that led them to approach my apartment transition as a care management project, rather than understanding that they were discussing logistics with a woman whose real estate expertise and property development success had created the professional opportunities and financial advantages that distinguish their middle-class achievements from typical educator and healthcare professional families who lacked similar family resources and community connections. Patricia's marketing success, Michael's medical practice development, and David's educational leadership all represented achievements that they considered evidence of personal competence and professional excellence, rather than understanding that their career trajectories reflected systematic family support and strategic advocacy that had created educational opportunities, professional connections, and community recognition that required family loyalty and gratitude rather than treating elderly relatives like care obligations and management responsibilities. But the most revealing aspect of my family's approach to transition planning was their assumption that my apartment downsizing represented elderly need for family assistance rather than understanding that major life transitions provided opportunities for successful children to demonstrate appreciation for the elderly relative, whose property development empire and municipal relationships had created the foundation for their comfortable professional lives and community standing within Connecticut's business, medical, and educational networks. They treated apartment coordination like elderly accommodation rather than recognizing that family transitions represented privileges that should be honored through personal sacrifice and emotional investment, rather than efficient management and convenient coordination that minimized time requirements and obligation demands while maintaining the appearance of family consideration and elderly support. "We definitely want to make sure you feel supported during this transition," Patricia had said with the diplomatic sympathy of someone providing care services rather than expressing genuine appreciation for family relationships and life achievements. "It's important that you don't feel isolated or overwhelmed, especially when you're dealing with all the changes and adjustments that come with downsizing and moving to a new environment." Patricia's reference to feeling, quote, isolated or overwhelmed revealed her assumption that elderly relatives needed family visits for emotional support, rather than understanding that apartment transitions represented opportunities for successful family members to honor the elderly relatives, whose life work had created their professional opportunities and financial advantages through real estate development and strategic investment in community improvement and municipal relationship building. "We know how challenging these kinds of transitions can be," Michael had added with the patronizing kindness of someone providing medical consultation rather than demonstrating genuine respect for family achievements and traditional values. "Moving and downsizing can be emotionally difficult for older adults, and it's important that you have adequate support and assistance during this adjustment period." Michael's suggestion that transitions were emotionally difficult for older adults demonstrated his complete medicalization of normal life changes, treating apartment downsizing like geriatric pathology, rather than understanding that family transitions represented opportunities for younger generations to demonstrate gratitude for the elderly relatives whose achievements had made their comfortable lives possible through property development success and community relationship building. "The most important thing is making sure you're comfortable and have everything you need," David had commented with polite concern that revealed his assumption that elderly relatives required care coordination rather than understanding that family transitions represented meaningful opportunities for respect demonstration and appreciation expression. "We want to make sure this move improves your quality of life and gives you the independence and security you deserve." But David's reference to independence and security revealed his fundamental failure to understand that my apartment transition wasn't about elderly accommodation but strategic preparation for inheritance management and property development expansion that would transform me from their perceived care responsibility into one of Connecticut's most influential property owners and community development leaders, whose real estate empire would provide opportunities for family members who demonstrated appropriate appreciation and respect. The August family meeting continued with detailed coordination of moving logistics and apartment setup, but what became increasingly clear was that my children had collectively decided that my transition represented elderly accommodation that successful professionals could manage through systematic planning and efficient coordination, rather than understanding that apartment downsizing provided opportunities to honor the property development expert whose municipal relationships and real estate success had been supporting their comfortable lifestyles and professional advancement for over 20 years. So we're thinking moving day coordination from maybe 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. would work well for everyone, Patricia summarized with obvious satisfaction that elderly obligations could be contained within a specific time frame that wouldn't interfere with professional responsibilities and weekend activities that apparently took priority over extended family support and transition assistance. That would give us time for family coordination while maintaining schedule flexibility for our other commitments and weekend plans. Michael agreed with obvious relief that elderly assistance could be minimized through collective agreement and systematic time limitation, rather than requiring the personal sacrifice and emotional investment that meaningful family support typically demanded from successful professionals who had benefited from elderly relatives' strategic planning and financial assistance. But their systematic coordination of minimal transition assistance revealed that my family had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of family relationships and generational respect, treating elderly relatives like service obligations, rather than understanding that family transitions represented opportunities for successful children to demonstrate appreciation for the elderly relatives whose life work had created their professional opportunities and financial advantages through decades of strategic planning and community investment. September 10th arrived with coordination calls that revealed the systematic nature of my family's approach to minimal transition assistance, and their collective effort to manage elderly obligations through efficient scheduling and convenient timing that preserved their professional priorities while maintaining the appearance of family consideration and transition support. Each family member contacted me individually to confirm their participation and coordinate their assistance schedule, but their conversations revealed careful planning and mutual support for minimizing time investment in family relationships that they considered secondary to professional responsibilities and personal activities. "Mom, I just wanted to confirm that moving day coordination will work perfectly with my schedule," Patricia called to announce, speaking with obvious relief that family obligations had been successfully contained within manageable time limits and wouldn't interfere with her marketing career responsibilities and weekend social activities. "I'll be able to help with apartment setup and still handle some insurance industry coordination that's important for quarterly planning and client relationship maintenance." Patricia's confirmation call revealed her assumption that family transitions should accommodate professional schedules rather than understanding that elderly relatives deserved personal sacrifice and time investment that demonstrated respect for traditional values and family heritage that couldn't be optimized through convenient coordination and strategic time management methods. "I'm really looking forward to helping with the transition," Michael called to confirm, obviously pleased that family assistance could be contained within specific time limits that wouldn't interfere with his medical practice responsibilities and hospital obligations that he considered more important than extended family support and elderly transition assistance. Michael's enthusiasm for time-limited family participation revealed his systematic approach to elderly obligation management, treating family relatives like scheduled appointments, rather than understanding that meaningful transition support required emotional investment and personal commitment that demonstrated appreciation for the property development expert whose real estate relationships had made his medical practice success possible. "Moving day coordination is going to work great with my teaching schedule," David called to announce, obviously satisfied that family transitions had been adjusted to accommodate his educational responsibilities and academic obligations that took priority over traditional family gathering and elderly transition participation. David's satisfaction with coordinated family assistance revealed his assumption that elderly relatives should adapt their needs to accommodate professional schedules, rather than understanding that family transitions represented opportunities for successful educators to demonstrate gratitude for elderly relatives whose educational facility partnerships and community relationships had created their teaching career advancement and professional recognition. But the most revealing aspect of their individual confirmation calls was the obvious coordination and mutual support that had occurred among family members who had collectively agreed that my apartment transition represented manageable elderly accommodation that successful professionals could handle through systematic planning and efficient coordination, rather than understanding that family transitions provided opportunities to demonstrate appreciation for the elderly relative whose real estate wealth had been supporting their comfortable lifestyles for decades. September 15th, moving day, brought the final revelation of my family's true approach to elderly support, and their systematic method of managing family obligations through convenient assistance that would trigger consequences they could never have imagined. Instead of arriving early for transition coordination as planned, I received a series of calls that revealed their ultimate prioritization of professional activities over family relationships and elderly appreciation. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but an urgent insurance situation came up that requires immediate attention," Patricia called at 7:30 a.m., just 30 minutes before their scheduled arrival time. "I'm going to have to handle this professional emergency that can't be postponed, but I'll try to stop by later if my schedule allows." Patricia's urgent insurance situation represented the final step in her systematic family avoidance, using professional emergency language to justify abandoning elderly transition support, while preserving her self-image as a dedicated marketing professional, rather than acknowledging that she was choosing career activities over family relationships and traditional elderly respect. "Really sorry, Mom, but emergency medical coverage required at the clinic," Michael called at 7:45 a.m., obviously coordinating with other family members to ensure that their collective transition abandonment appeared to result from unavoidable professional obligations rather than systematic family avoidance and deliberate dismissal of elderly relatives and family values. Michael's emergency medical coverage provided convenient justification for transition abandonment while maintaining his professional reputation and avoiding direct accountability for choosing medical practice obligations over family support and traditional elderly assistance during major life transitions. "Unexpected school emergency. Can't make moving day," David called at 7:50 a.m., using educational emergency language to justify his transition abandonment while preserving his self-image as a dedicated educator, rather than acknowledging that he was prioritizing teaching responsibilities over family relationships and elderly transition support. David's school emergency represented systematic excuse coordination with other family members who had collectively decided that transition abandonment could be justified through professional obligation language, rather than acknowledging their fundamental lack of appreciation for elderly relatives and traditional family values. By 8 a.m. on moving day, 30 minutes past their scheduled arrival time, every family member had abandoned my apartment transition through coordinated professional excuses that revealed their systematic planning and mutual support for avoiding family obligations and elderly support while maintaining their collective self-image as successful professionals with unavoidable commitments, rather than acknowledging their systematic dismissal of elderly relatives and traditional values. I completed my apartment transition alone, surrounded by moving professionals and transition coordinators who demonstrated more respect and consideration than my own children had shown during the most significant relocation of my adult life. The modest two-bedroom apartment that represented strategic preparation for inheritance management and property development expansion would become my headquarters for coordinating the real estate empire that my ungrateful family would soon learn controlled their financial futures and professional opportunities. The abandonment that my children justified through professional emergency coordination represented their final demonstration of character and family priorities that would determine their access to inheritance wealth and family legacy. The woman they had left alone during her apartment transition controlled enough real estate wealth and municipal influence to determine whether their children received educational funding, whether their professional reputations remained intact, whether their comfortable lifestyles survived the systematic withdrawal of property development support and community relationship access that had been creating their success patterns for over 20 years. But my children approached transition abandonment with the confident assumption that their professional achievements were self-made and their comfortable lifestyles were permanent, rather than understanding that their remarkable success patterns required continued family loyalty and respect for the elderly relative whose property development expertise had created the foundation for every advantage and opportunity they considered evidence of individual merit and personal achievement in competitive professional markets that demanded both technical competence and strategic community relationships for sustained career advancement. The apartment transition that seemed like an opportunity for my family to prioritize professional activities and career obligations became the most expensive lesson of their lives about the true cost of elderly abandonment, family dismissal, and professional arrogance toward women whose real estate expertise and community influence they couldn't even begin to comprehend or respect. Little did they know that within 6 weeks, Uncle Theodore's death would trigger the inheritance transfer that would transform their abandoned mother into one of Connecticut's wealthiest widows, and their transition abandonment would become the documented evidence of family character that would determine whether they deserved access to generational wealth or should be excluded from inheritance opportunities based on their treatment of elderly relatives and respect for traditional family values that distinguished responsible wealth management from entitled inheritance expectation and elderly exploitation. The moving day they had collectively abandoned would become the beginning of consequences that would teach my ungrateful family that elderly relatives who appear to need assistance may actually control property development empires worth tens of millions of dollars, possess the community influence to enhance or destroy professional reputations, and maintain the authority to determine whether younger generations deserve access to family wealth based on demonstrated appreciation, loyalty, and respect for the elderly relatives whose life achievements had made their comfortable lives possible through decades of strategic planning and community investment that required family. The phone call that would change everything came at 9:47 a.m. on October 28, 2023, exactly 6 weeks and 2 days after my children had abandoned me on moving day, leaving me alone to coordinate my apartment transition while they prioritized professional emergencies that would soon prove to be the most expensive career decisions of their lives. Attorney Harrison Mitchell from the prestigious law firm of Mitchell, Blackwood and Associates was calling to inform me that Uncle Theodore had passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days earlier, and that I needed to schedule an immediate appointment to discuss inheritance matters that would transform me from their perceived charity case into one of Connecticut's wealthiest widows practically overnight. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm calling to inform you that your Uncle Theodore Whitmore passed away on October 25th. Attorney Mitchell announced with the professional gravity of someone delivering news that would reshape family fortunes and generational wealth distribution. As the executor of his estate, I need to inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of his will, and we need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible to discuss the transfer of assets and responsibilities that this inheritance entails. The words sole beneficiary echoed through my modest Stamford apartment like a validation of every strategic decision I had made throughout 4 decades of property management partnership and family relationship maintenance. Uncle Theodore's $47 million real estate empire, the apartment complexes, commercial buildings, development properties, and investment portfolios that we had built together through patient planning and community-focused development, was now mine to control and manage according to my own values and family priorities. The estate includes extensive real estate holdings throughout Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, valued at approximately $47.3 million, along with liquid assets, investment accounts, and business partnerships that will require immediate attention and strategic management. Attorney Mitchell continued, his voice carrying the weight of generational wealth transfer that most families never experience. Mr. Whitmore left specific instructions that you should assume full control of all property management operations and community development programs, effective immediately upon his death. As Attorney Mitchell detailed the scope of my inheritance, 12 apartment complexes housing over 400 families, 8 commercial buildings supporting hundreds of local businesses, 14 single-family rental properties, 6 development parcels ready for construction, and investment accounts worth an additional $8.2 million. I felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that my decades of loyalty and strategic partnership had been recognized and rewarded, while my children's abandonment and disrespect had disqualified them from access to the very wealth that could have. The inheritance documents that Attorney Mitchell would deliver to my apartment that afternoon contained not just property deeds and financial account transfers, but also detailed instructions that Uncle Theodore had prepared for managing our real estate empire according to the community-focused values and tenant advocacy principles that had guided our success for nearly 40 years. He had entrusted me with continuing our tradition of quality housing development and affordable rental management, that served working families while generating the financial returns necessary for continued community investment and property improvement. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Uncle Theodore's will was the discretionary clause that gave me complete authority to determine which family members, if any, would benefit from inheritance wealth based on their demonstrated respect for elderly relatives and commitment to traditional family values that distinguished responsible wealth management from entitled inheritance expectation. Theodore had witnessed my children's systematic dismissal of family relationships and their assumptions about elderly dependence, and his will specifically stated that inheritance distribution should reward family loyalty and punish elderly exploitation. The legal documents that would arrive within hours contained provisions for establishing educational trusts, property management succession plans, and charitable foundation coordination, but they also included termination procedures for revoking inheritance access from family members who demonstrated ingratitude, elderly dismissal, or exploitation of family wealth for personal advancement without appreciation for the elderly relatives whose life achievements had created opportunities for younger generations. Within 48 hours of Uncle Theodore's death, my transformation from struggling retiree to multimillionaire property owner would be complete, but the most satisfying aspect of my inheritance wouldn't be the financial security or property ownership. It would be the opportunity to teach my ungrateful children the most expensive lesson of their lives about the consequences of elderly abandonment and the true cost of treating family relationships like inconvenient obligations rather than precious privileges that required nurturing and respect. The first indication that my children had learned about my inheritance came through a series of frantic phone calls on November 1st, just 4 days after Attorney Mitchell had delivered the estate documents, and 3 weeks after they had collectively abandoned me during my apartment transition. Patricia called first, her voice carrying a combination of shock, confusion, and barely concealed desperation that revealed her sudden understanding of the catastrophic miscalculation they had made about my financial situation and social standing. "Mom, I just heard some incredible news about Uncle Theodore's estate," Patricia announced, speaking with forced enthusiasm that couldn't conceal her panic about the inheritance implications and her family's previous treatment of me during the apartment transition. "I had no idea he had been so successful, and I'm absolutely amazed that he chose you as his heir. This is such wonderful news for our family." Patricia's sudden reference to our family, and her amazement about Theodore's success, revealed her immediate understanding that the elderly mother they had abandoned and dismissed as financially dependent had just inherited enough wealth to transform not only her own life, but potentially their entire family's financial future, if they could somehow repair the damage their abandonment had caused to family relationships and inheritance consideration. "I feel terrible that we weren't able to help more with your moving day," Patricia continued with obvious desperation to reframe their abandonment as unfortunate scheduling rather than deliberate family dismissal. "I know how stressful transitions can be, and I wish we could have been more supportive during what must have been such an overwhelming time for you." But Patricia's attempt to recharacterize their systematic abandonment as not able to help more demonstrated her immediate recognition that their professional emergency excuses and coordinated family avoidance had been documented at exactly the wrong time, just weeks before inheritance revelation, that would determine their access to generational wealth based on their treatment of elderly relatives and demonstrated family loyalty. Michael called within an hour of Patricia's conversation, his voice carrying the same combination of shock and poorly concealed avarice that revealed his sudden understanding of the financial opportunity they had jeopardized through their dismissive treatment of the woman who had just become one of Connecticut's wealthiest widows. "Mom, this inheritance news is absolutely incredible," Michael announced with forced excitement that couldn't hide his desperation about the missed opportunity and potential financial consequences of their family abandonment. "I had no idea Uncle Theodore had built such a successful real estate empire, and it's amazing that he recognized your dedication and chose you to continue his legacy." Michael's sudden appreciation for my dedication and Theodore's recognition revealed his immediate understanding that their medical practice success, educational opportunities, and comfortable lifestyle had been built on relationships with the family member they had just abandoned during her most vulnerable transition, and that their inheritance access now depended on convincing me that their abandonment had been misunderstood rather than deliberate disrespect. "I've been thinking about our family relationships lately, and I realize we haven't been as supportive as we should have been during your apartment transition," Michael continued with obvious coaching and family coordination about damage control strategies. Moving can be such a challenging time, and I wish we had been more available to help with the logistics and emotional support you needed. But Michael's carefully rehearsed apology and sudden concern about family relationships demonstrated his immediate recognition that their systematic family avoidance and elderly dismissal had been documented just weeks before inheritance distribution, that would be determined by their demonstrated respect for elderly relatives and commitment to traditional family values that they had systematically violated. David's call came that same evening, completing their coordinated damage control campaign with the same combination of shocked amazement and desperate relationship repair that revealed their collective understanding of the inheritance opportunity they had jeopardized through their abandonment and disrespect. "Mom, I'm absolutely stunned by this inheritance news," David announced with forced enthusiasm and obvious family consultation about optimal approaches to inheritance access and damage control. "Uncle Theodore must have really valued your relationship and trusted your judgment to leave you such an incredible legacy and responsibility." David's sudden understanding of Theodore's trust and my judgment revealed his immediate recognition that the educational opportunities, professional advancement, and financial security that had distinguished their family's success had been provided by the elderly relative they had systematically dismissed and abandoned during her apartment transition. "I've been reflecting on our family dynamics lately, and I realize we could have been more present and supportive during your recent transition." David continued with obvious preparation and family coordination about optimal strategies for repairing relationships and maintaining inheritance access. Teaching responsibilities and academic obligations sometimes interfere with family priorities, but that's not an excuse for not being there when you needed us most. But David's carefully crafted confession about family priorities, and his acknowledgement that professional obligations weren't excuses, demonstrated his immediate understanding that their coordinated abandonment had been documented at exactly the moment when inheritance evaluation would determine their access to generational wealth, based on demonstrated family loyalty and respect for elderly relatives. The pattern of their coordinated phone calls revealed that my children had immediately understood the catastrophic nature of their miscalculation about my financial situation, and the timing of their abandonment relative to inheritance distribution that would be determined by their demonstrated character and family values. Their sudden appreciation for family relationships and their desperate attempts to reframe systematic abandonment as scheduling misunderstandings showed their immediate recognition that they had jeopardized access to the $47 million inheritance that could have secured their children's educational futures and maintained their comfortable lifestyles indefinitely. But their damage control efforts came too late to influence inheritance decisions that had already been made based on documented evidence of their character and family priorities. The legal provisions that Uncle Theodore had included in his will specifically addressed situations where family members demonstrated elderly exploitation or inheritance entitlement, and their abandonment during my apartment transition had provided clear documentation of their true character and family values that would determine their exclusion from inheritance benefits. The second wave of their desperation campaign began on November 5th with family visits and coordination meetings that revealed their systematic strategy for inheritance access and their collective understanding that their comfortable lifestyles and children's educational futures now depended on convincing me that their abandonment had been misunderstood rather than deliberate disrespect and elderly dismissal. Patricia arrived at my apartment with flowers, expensive wine, and carefully prepared talking points about family relationships and inheritance coordination that revealed extensive consultation with her siblings about optimal strategies for damage control and wealth access. "Mom, I've been thinking about our family heritage and the incredible responsibility that Uncle Theodore has entrusted to you," Patricia announced while presenting her gifts and settling into my living room with obvious preparation for extended conversation and relationship repair. "This inheritance represents not just financial opportunity but also family legacy and generational responsibility that we should approach together as a united family." Patricia's sudden interest in family heritage and generational responsibility revealed her immediate understanding that inheritance access required family participation and demonstrated loyalty, rather than the individual career focus and elderly dismissal that had characterized their previous approach to family relationships. "I realize that our professional obligations and busy schedules have sometimes interfered with family priorities. Patricia continued with obvious preparation and legal consultation about optimal approaches to inheritance discussion and family reconciliation. But this inheritance opportunity gives us a chance to refocus on what's really important and work together to honor Uncle Theodore's legacy while supporting each other as a family. But Patricia's reference to inheritance opportunity and her suggestion that we should work together revealed her fundamental assumption that my inheritance represented family wealth that should be shared, rather than individual property that belonged to me based on my demonstrated loyalty, and Uncle Theodore's specific recognition of my strategic partnership and family relationship maintenance. Michael's visit the following day included similar gifts and equally prepared talking points about family unity and inheritance coordination that revealed their systematic approach to damage control and wealth access through collective pressure and coordinated relationship repair. "Mom, this inheritance represents such an incredible opportunity for our entire family," Michael announced while presenting his carefully selected gifts and settling into extensive conversation about family planning and wealth coordination. "Uncle Theodore obviously recognized your wisdom and dedication, and I think he would want this inheritance to benefit all of us as we work together to continue his legacy of community development and family success." Michael's assumption that the inheritance should benefit all of us, and his reference to Uncle Theodore's supposed intentions, revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of inheritance law and his entitled expectation that family wealth should be distributed, regardless of demonstrated character or respect for elderly relatives who had earned inheritance access through decades of loyalty and strategic partnership. "I've been thinking about ways we could coordinate our resources and expertise to maximize the impact of this inheritance, while ensuring that everyone benefits from Uncle Theodore's generosity." Michael continued with obvious family consultation and strategic planning about wealth distribution and family financial coordination. "My medical practice connections and Patricia's business relationships could really help with property management and community development if we approach this as a collaborative family enterprise." But Michael's suggestion that they could help with property management and his assumption that inheritance wealth should fund collaborative family enterprise demonstrated his complete failure to understand that his career success had already been supported through my strategic planning, and that inheritance access required demonstrated appreciation rather than entitled expectations about family wealth distribution. David's visit completed their coordinated campaign with the same combination of gift-giving, relationship repair, and inheritance coordination that revealed their collective strategy for wealth access and their shared assumption that inheritance wealth represented family opportunity rather than individual property earned through demonstrated loyalty and family relationship maintenance. "Mom, I've been researching Uncle Theodore's legacy and the incredible impact his community development has had throughout Connecticut," David announced while presenting his gifts and beginning his prepared presentation about family coordination and inheritance planning. "This inheritance gives our family an opportunity to continue his work while creating educational opportunities and community improvements that could benefit generations of families throughout New England." David's sudden interest in community development and his research into Theodore's legacy revealed his immediate understanding that inheritance access might require demonstrated commitment to community service and educational advancement, rather than the individual career focus and elderly dismissal that had characterized their previous approach to family wealth and opportunity. "I think Uncle Theodore would be proud to see our family working together to expand his vision while using our combined expertise and resources to create even greater community impact," David continued with obvious preparation and family consultation about optimal approaches to inheritance discussion and collaborative wealth management. "My educational connections and experience with scholarship administration could really complement your property management expertise if we coordinate our efforts strategically." But David's assumption that we should combine our expertise and his suggestion that inheritance wealth should fund expanded community programs revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation and his entitled expectation that family inheritance should support his educational career goals, rather than recognizing that inheritance access required demonstrated family loyalty and respect for elderly relatives whose achievements had created generational wealth opportunities. The culmination of their desperate campaign came on November 10th, with a coordinated family meeting that revealed their systematic strategy for inheritance pressure and their collective assumption that family unity and emotional manipulation could overcome documented evidence of their character and priorities during my apartment transition. "Mom, we've been talking as a family and we realize how much we've taken for granted your wisdom and guidance over the years," Patricia announced as the designated spokesperson for their collective inheritance appeal. This inheritance opportunity has made us reflect on our family relationships and recognize how much we need to refocus on supporting each other and honoring the values that Uncle Theodore obviously saw in you. Patricia's reference to taking my wisdom and guidance for granted and their need to refocus on supporting each other revealed their immediate understanding that inheritance access required demonstrated family values and elderly respect, rather than the professional prioritization and systematic abandonment that had characterized their actual behavior during my apartment transition. We want you to know that we're committed to being better family members and supporting you however you need as you take on this incredible responsibility, Michael added with obvious preparation and family coordination about optimal strategies for inheritance access and relationship repair. This inheritance isn't just about financial opportunity, it's about family legacy and our obligation to continue Uncle Theodore's community development work together as a united family. But Michael's promise to be better family members and his reference to our obligation revealed their fundamental assumption that inheritance wealth created family entitlements rather than individual property that belonged to me based on demonstrated loyalty, and Uncle Theodore's specific recognition of my strategic partnership and community relationship maintenance. We realize that our professional obligations have sometimes interfered with family priorities, but we want you to know that our family relationships are more important than any career considerations, David concluded, with obvious coaching and legal consultation about optimal approaches to inheritance discussion and family reconciliation. We're hoping we can work together to honor Uncle Theodore's legacy while strengthening our family bonds and supporting each other through this transition. But David's acknowledgement that they had prioritized professional obligations over family relationships, and his suggestion that they should work together, demonstrated their complete failure to understand that their systematic family dismissal had already disqualified them from inheritance consideration, and that their desperate appeals came too late to influence inheritance distribution that had been determined by documented evidence of their character during my apartment transition. The response I delivered to their coordinated inheritance appeal would teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives about the consequences of elderly abandonment and the true cost of treating family wealth like entitled inheritance rather than earned recognition of demonstrated loyalty and family relationship maintenance. I appreciate your sudden interest in family relationships and Uncle Theodore's legacy. I began with the calm authority of someone who had just inherited the power to determine their financial futures and professional opportunities. However, inheritance decisions have already been made based on demonstrated character and family values during the past several months, particularly during my apartment transition, when I needed family support and received systematic abandonment instead. The shock that registered on their faces revealed their immediate understanding that their damage control campaign had failed, and that inheritance access would not be determined by their desperate appeals, but by their documented behavior during the exact period when family loyalty and elderly respect had been most important. Uncle Theodore's will includes specific provisions for inheritance distribution based on demonstrated respect for elderly relatives and commitment to traditional family values. I continued while reviewing the legal documents that Attorney Mitchell had prepared for exactly this situation. Your abandonment during my apartment transition, your systematic prioritization of professional obligations over family relationships, and your assumptions about my financial dependence have been carefully documented and evaluated. The legal documents that I presented to my stunned children contained detailed provisions for inheritance exclusion based on elderly exploitation and family abandonment, along with specific criteria for evaluating family character and traditional values that distinguish deserving family members from entitled inheritance seekers who assumed elderly relatives represented financial opportunities rather than human beings deserving respect and appreciation. The real estate empire that you suddenly want to help manage has been transferred to my complete control, along with the authority to determine which family members, if any, deserve access to generational wealth based on their treatment of elderly relatives and demonstrated family loyalty. I explained while they processed the implications of their systematic miscalculation about family wealth and inheritance distribution. The inheritance documents that Uncle Theodore had prepared included provisions for establishing educational trusts and family support programs. but only for family members who demonstrated appropriate appreciation and respect for elderly relatives whose life achievements had created opportunities for younger generations. My children's abandonment and elderly dismissal had disqualified them from these benefits while documenting their character for inheritance evaluation purposes. Moving forward, the $47 million inheritance will be managed according to community development principles and family values that prioritize respect for elderly relatives and appreciation for generational wealth, rather than entitled expectations and inheritance assumptions, I announced, while they realized that their comfortable lifestyles and children's educational futures had been jeopardized by their systematic family abandonment and elderly dismissal. The immediate consequences of their inheritance exclusion began within days of our family meeting, as my children discovered that their professional success and financial security had been more dependent on family wealth and community relationships than they had ever understood or appreciated. Patricia learned that her marketing position at Hartford Insurance was being terminated due to the company's loss of property development partnerships and strategic relationships that had existed because of my real estate connections and community influence. Her $85,000 salary and executive benefits disappeared when the company lost revenue sources and business relationships that had been maintained through my property management network and municipal partnerships. Michael discovered that his medical practice was losing referrals and professional recognition as word spread throughout Connecticut's medical community about his family's treatment of elderly relatives, and their exclusion from inheritance wealth that had previously provided community influence and professional advocacy. His patient base and medical facility partnerships were compromised when healthcare administrators understood that his practice success had been dependent on family relationships rather than individual medical competence. David found that his teaching position and educational leadership opportunities were being reevaluated as school districts learned about his family's elderly abandonment and their assumptions about inheritance entitlement that violated traditional values and community standards for family relationship maintenance. His academic recognition and scholarship administration responsibilities were transferred to educators who demonstrated appropriate respect for elderly relatives and traditional family values. But the most devastating consequence of their inheritance exclusion was the impact on their children's educational futures and family financial security. The private school tuitions, college preparation programs, and educational opportunities that had distinguished their children's academic development were no longer affordable without the family wealth they had assumed would continue indefinitely, regardless of their treatment of elderly relatives. Patricia's children were withdrawn from elite private schools and enrolled in public education systems that lacked the academic resources and college preparation programs that had been funded through inheritance wealth and family educational partnerships. Her daughter's plans for prestigious university admission and her son's advanced academic opportunities disappeared, along with the financial resources that had made exceptional educational advancement possible. Michael's family faced similar educational and financial consequences as their comfortable lifestyle and children's academic advantages disappeared without access to inheritance wealth and family financial support. His children's private tutoring, enrichment programs, and college preparation activities became financially impossible, while his medical practice struggled with reduced patient base and professional isolation. David's family experienced the most ironic consequences, as his children lost access to the educational scholarships and academic opportunities that he had helped administer through my community development programs. His son's plans for advanced mathematics education and his daughter's college preparation programs were terminated, along with the family financial support that had made exceptional academic achievement possible. 6 months after their inheritance exclusion, my children's lives had been transformed from comfortable middle-class success to financial struggle and social isolation within Connecticut's professional communities. Their assumptions about elderly dependence and inheritance entitlement had cost them everything they thought they had earned through personal merit, while revealing the extent of their dependence on family wealth and community relationships that required appreciation and respect rather than entitlement and exploitation. Today, 2 years after they abandoned me during my apartment transition, my children work in service positions and struggle with basic financial obligations, while the inheritance wealth they had assumed would be shared continues supporting community development projects and educational programs for families who understand the value of respecting elderly relatives and maintaining traditional family values. Patricia works as a retail sales associate at a department store in Stamford, earning $32,000 annually while handling customer service and inventory management for a company that doesn't recognize her previous marketing experience or executive credentials. Her professional reputation was compromised by her family's elderly abandonment and inheritance exclusion, making her unsuitable for marketing positions that required community relationships and professional networking. Michael works as a medical insurance reviewer for a regional healthcare company, earning $45,000 annually, while processing claims and managing paperwork rather than providing patient care. His medical practice collapsed when his family's elderly exploitation became known throughout Connecticut's healthcare community, and his medical credentials became irrelevant when healthcare institutions understood that his previous success had been dependent on family wealth rather than individual medical competence. David works as a substitute teacher in various school districts throughout Fairfield County, earning inconsistent income while struggling to find permanent educational employment. His teaching career was effectively ended when school administrators learned about his family's treatment of elderly relatives and their assumptions about inheritance entitlement that violated educational community standards for family values and traditional relationship maintenance. The modest apartment in Stamford, where they abandoned me during my transition, continues serving as headquarters for the Whitmore Property Development Institute and community improvement programs that have expanded throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts under my leadership. The inheritance wealth that my children assumed would be shared based on family relationships now funds affordable housing development, educational scholarship programs, and community improvement initiatives that serve thousands of families who understand the value of respecting elderly relatives and traditional family values. The real estate empire that Uncle Theodore entrusted to my management has grown to include new property developments, expanded community service programs, and educational opportunities for young families who demonstrate appreciation for elderly wisdom and commitment to traditional values that distinguish responsible community development from entitled inheritance exploitation. Our property management network now employs over 200 professionals and provides quality housing for more than 600 families throughout southern New England. Sometimes the most important lesson you can teach ungrateful family members is that inheritance wealth isn't family property available for automatic distribution, but earned recognition of demonstrated loyalty and respect for elderly relatives whose life achievements created opportunities for younger generations who proved themselves worthy through family relationship maintenance and traditional value demonstration rather than professional prioritization and elderly dismissal. My children learned that elderly mothers who appear to need assistance may actually control multi-million-dollar property empires, possess the community influence to enhance or destroy professional reputations, and maintain the authority to determine whether younger generations deserve access to generational wealth based on their treatment of elderly relatives and respect for traditional family values that require personal sacrifice and emotional investment rather than convenient coordination and inheritance assumption. The apartment transition that seemed like an opportunity for my family to prioritize professional activities became the most expensive lesson of their lives about the true cost of elderly abandonment, family dismissal, and entitled assumptions toward women whose property development expertise and community influence they couldn't comprehend or respect until it was too late to matter. What would you have done if your children abandoned you during a major life transition while assuming your financial support was permanent and your inheritance wealth was automatically theirs? Have you ever encountered family members who took your generosity for granted while treating you like a burden, rather than understanding that your success created their opportunities and advantages? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if this story has inspired you to examine your own assumptions about elderly relatives and their potential influence over your financial future, and the importance of treating family wealth with the respect and appreciation it deserves regardless of how successful you believe your individual achievements have made you. And if you found this story of inheritance justice and family boundary protection resonating with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of people who discovered that exploiting elderly relatives and dismissing traditional family values can result in consequences more expensive than they could ever imagine, and more comprehensive than justice usually provides in family relationships, where respect and appreciation determine long-term inheritance access and generational wealth distribution. Remember, inheritance wealth isn't family property available for automatic distribution. It's earned recognition of demonstrated loyalty and respect for elderly relatives who have the right to determine how their life achievements benefit future generations who understand that family wealth requires family values and appreciation for those who built empires through decades of community service, rather than assuming they're entitled to inheritance benefits regardless of their treatment of elderly relatives who deserved respect instead of abandonment during their most vulnerable. 3 years have passed since that devastating November day, when I revealed to my children that their inheritance dreams had died along with their respect for elderly relatives, and the transformation has been nothing short of extraordinary. Not just in my own life as one of Connecticut's most influential property developers, but in the broader lesson this story has taught about the true cost of taking family for granted, and the immeasurable value of treating elderly relatives with the dignity and appreciation they deserve. The Whitmore Property Development Institute has become the most prestigious real estate education program on the East Coast, with a waiting list now extending over 4 years and alumni managing property portfolios worth over $2 billion collectively throughout New England and beyond. Our graduates don't just learn property management and community development, they master the art of respecting generational wisdom and maintaining family values that distinguish sustainable wealth creation from exploitative business practices that prioritize profit over people and community service. Last month, we broke ground on our largest community development project yet, the Theodore Whitmore Memorial Housing Complex in Hartford, a 240-unit affordable housing development that will provide quality homes for working families, while serving as a living testament to the values that built our real estate empire. The project includes a community center, educational facility, and senior services program that demonstrates how property development can serve community needs while generating returns that support continued investment in neighborhood improvement and family stability. The most satisfying aspect of this development isn't the $18 million construction budget or the 400 construction jobs it's creating. It's the bronze plaque at the entrance that reads, "Dedicated to families who understand that respect for elderly relatives and traditional values creates the foundation for generational prosperity and community strength." Every family who moves into these beautiful apartments will see that reminder about the importance of honoring elderly wisdom and maintaining family relationships that too many people take for granted until it's too late to matter. My personal transformation from abandoned mother to respected community leader has exceeded even my own expectations for what inheritance wealth could accomplish when managed with wisdom and community focus. The modest apartment in Stamford has been replaced by a beautiful estate in Greenwich that serves as both family home and business headquarters, with guest quarters specifically designed for elderly relatives who deserve comfort and dignity in their golden years, a sharp contrast to the dismissive treatment my own children demonstrated during my vulnerable transition period. The estate includes a memorial garden dedicated to Uncle Theodore, where I spend quiet mornings reflecting on the journey that brought us to this point, and planning the next phase of community development projects that will benefit thousands of families throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. The garden features a fountain engraved with Theodore's favorite saying, "Real wealth isn't what you accumulate, it's what you create for others and how you treat the people who created opportunities for you." But perhaps the most meaningful transformation has been watching my former tenants and community partners thrive under property management that prioritizes tenant satisfaction and community improvement over maximum profit extraction. Tenant satisfaction ratings across our properties have reached 97%, with families choosing to renew leases year after year because they understand they're living in communities managed by people who respect both their housing needs and the elderly wisdom that created these opportunities for quality affordable housing. The ripple effects of treating people with dignity and respect have created a network of community advocates and property development professionals who share our values and contribute to continued expansion of ethical business practices throughout Connecticut's real estate industry. Municipal planning officials, construction contractors, and community organizations seek partnerships with our development network because they know our projects will serve community needs while maintaining the highest standards for construction quality and tenant relations. My children's current situation serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences that follow when people prioritize personal convenience over family relationships and assume elderly relatives will continue providing support regardless of treatment received. Their financial struggles and social isolation within Connecticut's professional communities have become a cautionary tale about the importance of respecting elderly relatives and maintaining traditional family values that determine access to generational wealth and community influence. Patricia's retail position at the department store has become permanent employment, With no prospects for advancement or return to marketing careers that require community relationships and professional networking, she destroyed through elderly abandonment and inheritance entitlement. Her children attend public schools that lack the academic resources and college preparation programs they had enjoyed when family wealth supported their educational advancement, and her daughter's dreams of attending prestigious universities have been replaced by community college plans and student loan applications. Michael's medical insurance review position provides basic income, but none of the professional satisfaction or community recognition he had enjoyed when his family connections provided practice development support and patient referrals. His children's private tutoring and enrichment programs ended when family financial support disappeared, and his son's plans for medical school have been compromised by the family's reduced financial circumstances and damaged reputation within Connecticut's healthcare community. David's substitute teaching assignments provide inconsistent income and no opportunity for educational leadership or scholarship administration that had distinguished his career when family wealth supported his professional advancement. His children lost access to the educational scholarships and academic opportunities he had helped coordinate through my community development programs, and his daughter's mathematics talents are no longer supported by the advanced academic programs that family wealth had previously funded. The most poignant aspect of their situation is watching their children struggle with educational limitations and financial constraints that could have been avoided if their parents had understood the value of respecting elderly relatives and maintaining family relationships that required personal sacrifice and emotional investment rather than convenient coordination and professional prioritization that demonstrated their true character during my most vulnerable transition period. However, my story isn't just about consequences and justice. It's also about redemption and the possibility that future generations might learn from their parents' mistakes and choose different approaches to family relationships and elderly respect that could restore their access to community influence and educational opportunities that traditional family values create for those who demonstrate appropriate appreciation and loyalty. Last month, Patricia's teenage daughter contacted me directly to apologize for her family's treatment during my apartment transition and to express genuine interest in learning about property development and community service that could restore their family's reputation within Connecticut's business community. Her letter demonstrated maturity and family values that her parents had failed to model, and it opened the possibility that the next generation might understand the importance of respecting elderly relatives and maintaining traditional values that distinguish responsible wealth management from entitled inheritance expectation. The scholarship fund that I've established for young people who demonstrate respect for elderly relatives and commitment to community service has already provided educational opportunities for 12 students whose families understand the value of intergenerational relationships and traditional values that create foundation for academic achievement and professional success. These scholarships represent hope that future generations will learn from my children's mistakes and choose family loyalty over professional convenience when facing decisions about elderly relatives and inheritance stewardship. The property management training programs that we offer through the Whitmore Institute now include mandatory coursework on family values and elderly respect that ensures our graduates understand the human relationships and community responsibilities that distinguish ethical property development from exploitative business practices. These educational requirements have created a new generation of real estate professionals who prioritize tenant advocacy and community improvement while maintaining respect for the elderly wisdom and traditional values that built their industry. My legacy won't be measured just in property holdings or financial returns, but in the families who learn to prioritize relationships over career advancement and the communities that benefit from property development guided by respect for elderly wisdom and commitment to traditional values that serve human needs rather than profit maximization. The thousands of families who live in our properties, work in our community programs, and benefit from our educational initiatives represent the true value of wealth managed with appreciation for the elderly relatives and traditional values that created opportunities for respectful property development and community service. As I write this final chapter from my beautiful Greenwich estate, surrounded by gardens that honor Uncle Theodore's memory and community awards that recognize our property development success, I'm reminded that the most important inheritance isn't money or property, it's the values and relationships that determine how wealth serves future generations and community improvement rather than individual accumulation and family exploitation. The children who abandoned me during my apartment transition lost more than inheritance wealth. They lost the opportunity to participate in community development that serves thousands of families and creates generational prosperity for those who understand that real success requires respecting elderly relatives and maintaining traditional values that distinguish responsible wealth management from entitled inheritance assumption and elderly dismissal. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give ungrateful family members is the opportunity to learn that respect for elderly relatives isn't optional social obligation. It's the foundation for generational prosperity and community influence that determines whether families build lasting legacies or destroy opportunities through selfishness and elderly exploitation that reveals character when it matters most. Remember, inheritance wealth isn't guaranteed family property. It's earned recognition of demonstrated values and elderly respect that creates foundation for generational prosperity and community service that serves future generations who understand that real wealth comes from relationships and traditional values, rather than professional achievement and inheritance entitlement that ignores the elderly wisdom and sacrifice that made comfortable lives possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.